So we all know there's things that you can do on a bike that you just can't do in a car. And some of those things are legal and some of those things aren't legal. One of the most debated things on a motorcycle is lane splitting. And lane splitting is actually illegal in every single state except for one, and that state is California. But the whole reason why people lane split legally or illegally is actually to get away from cars or get to where we're trying to get a little bit faster. Even though it's illegal in every single state except for California, a lot of people are still doing it just because they believe it's safer. And the whole argument is you don't want to be just stationary and put yourself in a situation where you could get hit from the back. And that's why people argue that sometimes it's better just to filter, and it keeps us from sitting in traffic. However, it can still be more dangerous because you have to watch out for cars pulling out in front of you and side swiping you. This can also cause an accident. Sometimes it might be safer to lane split or lane filter. That's obviously going to be your call. But what I always say is it's only illegal if you actually get caught. And when it comes to being in traffic in general, there's just a lot of things you can do on a bike that you just can't get away with in a car. Sometimes we actually pull off to the shoulder, like in this situation right here. I'm going right anyways. So for me to just sit in this traffic, it's one of those things where you're just actually in more danger. It's not something that's necessarily legal, but it's something that you can get away with on a bike that you wouldn't necessarily get away with or even do in a car. And not only do bikers lane split, but we actually use the entirety of the lane. Like in this situation, you see me to the far left, and then you see me swing out to the far right. And what I'm actually doing is trying to get better visibility. Most of the time it's better to be to the far left, but sometimes it's actually better to be on the right side. It just depends on the situation. And another example of that is if something's in the middle of the road, we don't want to be dead center in the middle of the road for a multitude of reasons. If you're in a car, you're just going to go over it and nothing's going to happen. If you're on a bike and you're in the middle of the road, that could actually cause an accident. So that's why you see us moving to the far left or moving to the far right. It's not just because we can, it's actually safer to do. And that's something that you can do on a bike that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in a car. And another thing you can do on a bike that you can't do in a car is actually run red lights. Yes, you heard that correct. They skipped us. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to run it. Now, every state has different laws when it comes to that, but you're actually legally allowed to run red lights on a motorcycle. If the light has skipped you 2 times or more, or you've been waiting 2 minutes or longer, you're actually legally allowed to run that red light. And the reason why we're allowed to do that is because when you're sitting at a red light, the light doesn't always register that a motorcycle's there. Motorcycles are much smaller and weigh a lot less, so the sensors don't actually pick up that you're at the light, and you'll literally be sitting there forever. And that's something that you obviously got to be careful with, because if you run the light at the wrong time, it could be a disaster. So you are legally allowed to do that, but it's something that you have to be careful doing. And if you don't feel comfortable doing it, try taking another route to avoid that, or try being behind a car so you're not in that situation, or consider turning right, because that's actually the safest thing you could do through an intersection. And this next thing is going to sound kind of crazy, but something that bikers get away with, probably more so than cars, is actually speeding. In certain situations, it's actually safer to use your speed to your advantage. If you're in like a pack of cars, sometimes it's actually better to speed and get away from the cars, because other than ourselves, cars are the most dangerous things on the road, because if you get hit by a car on a bike, it's not going to feel too good, and that can lead to life-threatening injuries or even cost you your life. So the best thing to do is actually get away from cars, and that's why I like a faster bike on the highway, because I feel like I have much more control out there, and if someone's being crazy, I can either get over and let them by, or I can use my speed to my advantage and get away from those cars. But it can also be a disaster if you're not careful. And that's why everybody dies on these things, is because of how fast they are. But you also have to remember, this bike can do maneuvers that a car could never do, and can accelerate much faster than pretty much any car out there. So it can actually be safer if you use it responsibly, which we all know most people don't, but if you actually do use it responsibly, you can use it to your advantage. And there's a time and a place. If you're like in a residential area, obviously you don't want to be going 45 and a 25. That's something that you just don't do. And same thing with this situation right here. This is a situation where you don't speed, because cars can just pull out. And this rider got very lucky. There wasn't a car coming in the opposite direction, because he could have got hit and seriously injured. In congested areas where you're blinded by other vehicles and they can't see you, it's definitely not safer to speed. And we've all heard experienced riders say, sometimes you just have to forget about the law and do what's safer. And when you're on the highway, it's pretty much everyone for themselves. And when you're on a bike, sometimes it's better just to turn your head to certain laws, especially if you feel like you're doing it to keep you safer. And one of those things is using your speed to your advantage. We do that to get away from cars, and sometimes that can actually be safer. Usually the rule is you either want to be falling behind or pulling ahead. And when you're pulling ahead, sometimes that requires you to go a little faster than traffic. And most of the time, if you actually do get pulled over, most cops ride and they understand. And another thing that you get away with on motorcycles that you would really never get away with in a car is parking wherever you want. And we're not doing this just because we think we're better than everybody. It's simply because it's a motorcycle. Someone can easily sit on it, tip it over, hit it. They're much more of a liability than a car. If it gets hit, it's going on the ground and it's going to be damaged. And most of us aren't going to be happy about that. So usually the rule is you park in an area where you can always keep an eye on it or where cars are not going to be. Especially if you're in like a regular parking spot and there's a car next to you. The car next to you can actually block your bike. If you're coming in on this side, it might look like this spot's open. And if they just swing in, they're going to nail your bike. That's why I typically don't park next to cars so I can keep an eye on it. Or I'll park like in this area over here. You see me getting off my bike over here. The reason why I'm doing that is because no car is going to park over here. So we're not necessarily doing it just because we think we're better than cars and we can just do whatever we want. We do it because motorcycles are much more of a liability in comparison to a car. So another thing that a lot of bikers get away with is illegal tag displacement.
Actually, like they have the tag, but
they fold it up. They're probably going to stop you for that because it's an indicator. If these lights come on behind you, you're probably going to keep going. And a lot of people have those modifications where you can flip the tag up. And I know a lot of sport bike guys either don't have a tag, a fake tag, or they do this modification right here. That one's illegal. Obviously, the tag can't swing back and forth like that. We've all seen that video, and it's actually pretty funny. But running from the cops is not the smartest thing to do. And usually if you pull over, if you're not doing something extremely illegal or doing insane speeds, most of the time they'll let you go. And another thing they do too is if they actually don't have a tag, what they'll do is they'll put it in their book bag and actually have no tag on the bike. Just in case they do get stopped, they'll use the excuse of it's in their book bag. They don't have the tag bracket, which everyone knows is BS. But surprisingly, most of the time they actually get away with it. But it's actually really common on a sport bike to have your tag tucked up. Pretty much every single person does that rides them. I'm one of the only ones that doesn't. If you have your tag showing, they'll like leave you alone. And I actually never get bothered because of that. Because we all know when it's tucked up in a position where you can't see it, or you have that mod where you can flip it up and hide it, we all know that you have every intention of running. And that's something that they usually tolerate a little less. Just because when you see that, you know the person's probably going to run.
The cop just looks at you like just sitting on it, is going to think that you're going to run.
But if you have it in a place where you can see it, usually they'll just leave you alone. And another thing that you can get away with on a bike, that sometimes you can get away with in a car, but most of the time you can't, is a modified exhaust. Where I live, there's no emissions testing on bikes, which doesn't make it legal, but pretty much every single bike where I live, they're all stupid loud, and most of them have modified exhausts. When you buy an exhaust, it usually says for off-road use only. That pretty much means it's illegal and you can't use it on the public road. Even a slip-on exhaust can be illegal, but pretty much every single person gets away with that. And sometimes us bikers say that a loud pipe is actually safer. And I actually do believe that it can be beneficial to have a louder exhaust because we all know that if you can hear them, most of the time you can see them. And some people will argue, oh, the exhaust is behind you. And I said this in my last video. I don't care which direction the exhaust is facing. If a Harley's coming up, there's pretty much no way that you're not going to hear it. And that's a good example of sometimes a loud exhaust can actually be safer. That's a heavily debated topic, kind of like lane splitting. Some people believe it's safer, others believe it's more dangerous. But if you're like a car and it's extremely loud, you're probably more likely to get in trouble with that than you are on a motorcycle because a motorcycle doesn't pollute the air nearly as much as a car does, and they don't get ridden as much either. And because we're on bikes and we're already like a high risk and it's a bike, usually they just whatever. Unless you're like rev bombing it at a light or just being a complete a-hole with it, usually they'll kind of just let you slide on a modified exhaust. If you do get pulled over, you always say the previous owner did it or you bought it like that. That's what you always say if you get pulled over for modified exhaust. And another thing that you can do on a motorcycle that you can't do in a car is go on toll roads for free. However, that depends on the state. Sometimes they let you do it completely for free. Sometimes they'll charge you less. In a car, you always have to pay. On a motorcycle, that's not always the case. For example, like being on the Easy Pass, every every single car that goes on the Easy Pass is going to be charged, whereas a bike can actually go on the Easy Pass for free because it's actually safer for a motorcycle to be on the Easy Pass in comparison to like a 5-lane highway where it's like a million cars to one bike. It's just more dangerous, and there's a lot of things that you have to actually worry about. And motorcycles are also allowed in the HOV lane whenever they want. In comparison to a car, you can only go in the HOV lane if you have up to 2 or 3 people. The whole purpose is to keep traffic moving. And if you think about a motorcycle, they don't hold up traffic like other vehicles do. And for them to just sit in traffic, it's just more dangerous. So it's better just to let them flow ahead of traffic just because it makes more sense and it actually keeps them safer. And if you guys want a sport bike and want to know more about the risk that goes into that, I highly suggest you watch this video right here. And if you're thinking about buying a motorcycle and you want to save a couple bucks, watch this video right here and I'll help you do that.